I'm Lara Matosian, host of the Adjacent Possible podcast. The Adjacent Possible is a kind of shadow future, hovering on the edges of the present state of things, a map of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. This podcast is all about probing what's possible, what's probable, and what's preferable in education. Join us as we explore how we can overhaul our current pedagogical systems, solve global grand challenges, and bring about civilization-level change. The Adjacent Possible podcast is held in partnership with Area 2071, which is part of the Dubai Future Foundation. The Adjacent Possible podcast is also supported by Academy, a global educational organization that offers future-focused and wisdom-based education to high school learners with the aim of preparing them for a world of automation, artificial intelligence, and accelerating change. Our guest today is Marc Prensky. Welcome to the Adjacent Possible podcast. You join me, your host, Lara Matosian, and our guest, Marc Prensky, a dad of a 13-year-old pilot and writer and speaker on education. Marc, welcome.
Thank you, Lara. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. Marc, you are the founder and executive director of the Global Future Education Foundation and Institute. Tell us a little bit about your role and about the Institute.
Thank you. We set ourselves up to try to think about what education should be and how to make it better for all the kids in the world, because it's really not working as well as it should right now. And we do initiatives. We've published books. We put together a database of projects that kids have done around the world, real-world projects. And our latest initiative is called AriseNet.world, which is a way to take people who are doing a different kind of education, and most people are doing this separately, and try to bring them all together so that we have an educational alternative in the world that's different than academics.
And how has this been received?
Well, it's been received very well by the people who want to do it and the people who are doing it. And the world is interesting because we really have only one kind of education in the world, which is academic education. And everybody who's trying to improve education is working somehow to improve that education incrementally at the margins.
Yes.
But what I've observed in looking around the world is that there's another kind of education that's emerging. And so the tradition of thinking, which is the academic tradition, is being supplemented by the tradition of accomplishment, which is our oldest educational tradition. And for the people for whom the academic tradition isn't really the right way to go, it's always been a very narrow group until recently when it's kind of expanded to the world, we can have a different tradition, which is continuous real-world impact projects. And the people who are doing that, whether they're teachers, whether they're students, whether they're some schools, whether they're individuals, are really having great results with it. And I think it's a growing movement in the world.
I would agree with you, and I would link it to education for civilization-level change.
Well, yes, I think there's two meanings to that. We want to have civilization-level change. We want to improve. We're going into a new era. We have to do things that make our whole human civilization reach a new level. And at the same time, we have to change what we mean by education. Because if we think that education is just courses and classes, then we go out when we finish the courses and classes and do stuff, that's not the way the modern world is working. Because our kids are now becoming what I call symbiotic hybrids with technology.
I was hoping you'd say that. Tell us what you mean by that.
I mean that if you look at the kids today, And I can point to the kids in the States, but I think this is true all over the world. And these kids who have their cell phones or their mobile phones and we can't pull them away from them. We're fighting them really hard. And I think that's such a backwards way to look at it, because what those kids are doing is telling us, this is a part of me. I am now an extended mind. Yes. I am networked with all the other people on the planet. I need to use this. How do I do it? And because we haven't really encouraged them to do that, they do sometimes silly things. They play games. They do whatever they can. And we somehow think that by taking this away from them, we're going to make them better, because we thought we were better. But they're moving to a very new place. And humans in general are moving to a new place. Their minds have been extended. They've been networked together. And so the goal, I think, is for all of us to be good, unique, effective, symbiotic hybrids who can improve the world working in teams together.
And so how do we practically transform our education systems to allow for this to happen?
Well, this is an interesting thing, because everybody that I know who's in education has been knocking their head against the wall. The academic education system that we have is incredibly resistant to change. And that may be a good thing. It's like the human body that remains the same even though our cells continuously renew and change. But it doesn't work for everybody. And so my sense, increasingly, and this was an epiphany several years ago, but I think it's really right, is that we have to do an end run. We have to have parallel systems. One system, we're not going to get rid of the academic system. It's going to be there. People want it. Parents want it. Other people want it. Gets you into college. But for other people, we need an accomplishment track. And the nice thing about an accomplishment track is it's not that hard to set up. We've always had multiple tracks. In the past, we had vocational academic. We've had special tracks for people with special needs. We can have an accomplishment track that anybody can opt into. Teachers who are uncomfortable delivering content in the old system can be part of it. Parents who see that their kids need more accomplishment can do that. And kids especially, as you said last night yourself, who really prefer acting and accomplishing to just sitting there and learning. And my kid is one of them as well.
I am one of them too.
And they can have a separate system. You know, as my kid says, am I going to just sit here for the next 12 years and sit in a classroom? That's not what I want to do.
Yes, I completely feel with him. So how can we empower our students to be world changers?
Well, I think it's more than world changers. A lot of people talk about change makers and Ashoka and all those people, and that's good. It's got to be world improvers. Hitler changed the world. You know, but not for the better. And so we've got to focus kids on positive change. And it can be whatever they think is positive change, but it really needs to be that way. And we have to have different goals for kids. We bring kids into school and we say, your goal is to learn this stuff and get good grades, the stuff that we think you should learn. We could bring kids into school and say, what are your dreams? Our job as your school, as your teachers, is to help you realize those dreams. By the way, you live in a world that's connected with technology. Let's think about that. I don't even care if that you have it in your hand, because sometimes that's a distraction. I want to say, what does it mean when you're connected to everyone on the planet? What does it mean when you have access to a supercomputer? What does it mean? And one of the interesting thoughts that I had just recently is, here's this horrible, horrible situation in New Zealand, right? But the guy made effective use of technology. He live streamed what he was doing. And why aren't our kids doing that in a positive way? Why aren't they addressing the issues of guns in school and the issues of boredom and the issues of all these things? Because they're so powerful. They're so empowered. But we don't tell them they're empowered. We don't actually, I think a lot of people are afraid of them and don't want them to be empowered.
I think I agree with you on that one.
Because they will do things that we couldn't do, that we haven't thought about. They will abandon some things that we have done that we always thought were great. or we pretend we're great, like face-to-face conversation, which is 90% about the weather. And but yet, if you talk about people, oh my God, you know, they look at their devices and not looking us in the eye. And yet, on their devices, they may be doing great things. They may be communicating with each other, and they may be building things, and they may be doing projects. So it's really there's a huge switch in mindset that's taking place in the world that I think is very, very difficult for the adults of today.
Yes. I would agree with you. In fact, you coined a term some years ago. Tell us, our listeners, about those terms that you coined.
Well, I coined the term digital natives and digital immigrants because the kids were really approaching the technology differently, and the adults had come to it later in life. And what I've come to realize is that it is less about the technology than it is about the attitudes and about the culture. And kids have different attitudes now towards privacy, towards so many things, and we're watching the world change really quickly. I mean, look at the United States and other places, how they've changed about sexual attitudes, and how they've changed about marijuana, and how they've changed about other kinds of things. These changes are coming incredibly rapidly as the generation changes. And so what I think now, the great challenge for the future for our kids is not global warming, we're going to fix that, we're going to fix. It's really becoming symbiotic with these very, very powerful technologies.
Yes.
And so that's why I talk about symbiotic hybrids.
And so from your personal experience, apart from this fundamental change in mindset that we need to do, what has been a consistent barrier to change and transform the education space?
Well, everybody went through school. And these days, everybody went through the same school. They went through an academic program. In English, I call it the MESS, Math, English, Science, Social Studies. But it can be whatever language it has to be. And they've come to the idea that that's what an education is. An education is thinking. An education is critical thinking, if you want to take it to the top, or memorization, or whatever it is. But that's only a piece of an education. A real education is thinking and acting and relating and especially accomplishing. And the reason we learn is in service of accomplishing. So a lot of people in the world think now that education and learning are the same thing. And they're not. They're not. Learning is important, but it's important as a co-product or a byproduct of getting something positive done.
So let's just stop for a moment on accomplishing. It is not the sort of accomplishment of collecting qualifications and accolades and grades and certificates, is it? When you say accomplishment, you mean?
I distinguish between achievement and accomplishment. Achievement is something that you do that is basically for you. You become the valedictorian. You get good grades. You climb Mount Everest. You do whatever it is that benefits essentially you. An accomplishment, in my parlance, is something that you do for other people, that benefits the world, that makes the world hopefully a better place. And so the idea of accomplishments are things you would list on your resume as projects that you've done, things where you've helped, how you've added value, how you've created value, as opposed to just how you've built your own self up.
And so for you, the context of accomplishment is what will motivate effective learning.
I think that it will cause learning to happen because we learn constantly. I mean, we can't help learning. But directed learning is almost always towards a goal that we want to accomplish. And that's what gives us the motivation to keep going, to practice a million golf swings or to practice whatever it is that we're doing. It's because we want to get somewhere. And the learning for its own sake is nice for some people. I like it. But it's not what most people want to do. Most people, actually, given the experiences they've had, dislike it. But if they really want to get somewhere, if they want to be somewhere, if they want to have a job, if they want to accomplish something, or the better word for accomplish, if you prefer, is just get things done. That's what Google said on their website. We need people who can get things done. And that's the sad irony is that people can go through 12 or 20 years of academic education, and when they come out and go into a job or a company, they can't do anything. They start at the very bottom.
Yes.
They need a totally new education in accomplishing. And it's really a shame that we have to do it twice.
That is sad but true. Let's move on to the Better Their World database. So what is that, and what was the inspiration behind it?
I looked around at many organizations, and I see that there are teams of young people, kids, all over the world at all ages. Design for Change is a great organization for doing this, but there are many, many other organizations. Academy is trying to do this. And the kids were really doing things that were very positive in the world. And they were making the positive impact that I was looking for, and yet there was no collection of this. There was no place to go to say, oh, look what kids have done at all these different levels. And so my goal was to try to say, let's pull all the ones together that I can find that have measurable positive impact. That's my metric. And to say, let's put them in one place, let's make them searchable, let's add as many as we can find. So we did.
And how has this been used by educators and learners?
Well, I think it's mostly inspiration. That's what it's intended for. It's not saying, well, they did this project and you could do it. That's possible. You can adapt any project. If you have a problem with reseeding a field, you can say, well, look what they did in Colombia with drones, and they did that, and you say, oh, maybe we can do something like that. But it's mostly to try to inspire people to say, look at how young people have improved the world in terms of making it cleaner, making it better, really reaching all the kinds of goals that are on the UN's list and that are on the sustainability's list. The kids are already working on that stuff deeply and having a lot of success. A great example is the 11-year-old who built the app to measure the lead in the water in Flint, Michigan, right? So it's amazing what the teams of people are doing, cleaning huge radio telescopes in the world with robotics, tracking garbage in the ocean with drones. Many, many of these things are already happening. And if the kids, my feeling is the more that the kids, and hopefully their teachers as well, see what's possible, the more they'll be inspired to think of new things they can do.
So we touched on the problems facing schools today earlier. How open do you think schools are to change?
I think it varies all over the place. What I would really like to see is this idea of a separate accomplishment track. And I think, I don't know how many places have really done that. I think some have. High Tech High, for example, in the U.S., started 20 years ago doing that. And it's not taken off like a wildfire, but it has inspired various people to do similar things. And so I don't think that schools are particularly open to change at the margins. I think the academic system is very fixed, and they might add a little bit of social emotional or add some technology or do this. But I think there's a real opportunity now to have a parallel, equally valid, equally intensive education that is different. And I think that would work for many, many people in the world.
And for naysayers who would ask you, so how would you assess that? At university, they study academics and they get grades, and therefore they get a qualification. How would you convince those on the other side to say, well, yes, this would work? How would you assess, let's say?
Assessment is important. You want to know what's happening. But the metric that I would use is measurable positive impact. And if somebody came out of one of these schools, I would like to see their resume, just like you would show to a company, that says, here are the measurable positive impacts I have made in the world. And I think that's actually easier to measure than grades, because the kind of testing we do, with the exception of the most simple yes, no, right, wrong, is impossible. Ranking, and it's basically based on ranking. Ranking is not only destructive, it's not possible.
I completely agree with you. Yes,
So I think my motto for this is ranking kills.
Yes.
The high school next door to me, where my son unfortunately is going to go, is the school in California where the kids were throwing themselves under the trains because they had such academic pressure.
That is heartbreaking.
It was
That's
very hard.
inexcusable.
Yes.
Really not okay.
There's no reason for it, because every person is unique.
Yes.
And so to say we're going to rank you on these particular criteria ignores everything else about that person. And that's why I want to have these unique symbiotic hybrids who can work together in teams, so that everybody contributes what comes from their own individual dreams and strengths and passions. And that, if we see people as that individuals, and we see them as extended with all the new technologies and all the new things that they have, I think we will make a lot of progress forward in the world.
I personally think that students will jump at the opportunity for a different track. But what about the other stakeholders? How do we inspire them to make these changes?
Well, the curious thing is not everybody jumps immediately. You think that they would. But there are kids who have learned to game the system. And they're perfectly happy. Don't tell me I have to do a project that I have to invent, that I have to make up. Every teacher I know who's tried that had to go through the period of saying, wait, you're not telling me what to do. Because that's mostly what we do in school. We tell kids what to do. We treat them as pets. My next book is going to be called Our Kids Are Not Pets. We're not going to say, sit here, do this, roll over, perform the tricks I taught you, which is what testing is. No, we're going to give them much more freedom. We're going to let them be the kind of people that they can be. So some of them will and some of them won't. That's why it has to be an opt-in system.
Yes.
Same for teachers. There are teachers who love providing the content they've always provided. Let them stay. There are politicians who want to say, well, we have this system and it's about college and it's about all this stuff. Let it be. But for the people who don't want that, who see that there's an alternative, we want to have a very strong end-to-end alternative, so that you can start in elementary school or primary school with this kind of education, and you know that there will be a tertiary education for you that's much better. Because if you're only starting, as many are now, to do projects when you get into college or university, you're so far behind the 8 ball.
Yes.
You think of the project you could do if you had been preparing for 12 or 20 years to do this.
Wow. And if you were to run a parallel track, what would the obstacles and challenges be for a change like that?
Well, there would be some, but in talking to people around the world who are in schools, who've done these kind of things, who've set up separate tracks, it is possible. There's everything from jealousy to figuring out, your kids are happy or what's going on. There are all kinds of barriers and all kinds of things. But I think this is a much more overcomable set of challenges than the trying to take the system we have and really make it a different system.
And how involved are the students in driving these changes?
Not as much as they could be or should be, I think. Students are not aware, and I think this is a lot our fault, of how powerful they are.
I think I have to agree with you on that.
And when they figure it out, it turns out that they can do an enormous amount. Their biggest complaint is we listen to them. Sometimes we have this thing called student voice at conferences, but it's mostly a joke, because the real ones say, yeah, you listen, but you don't act. that we don't have any voice in meaningful change that goes on. If we say we want a separate track, nobody will give it to us. So that's the issue, is really trying to help kids understand their power. And I've written an article recently called "When Will Our Empowered Kids Arise?"
Yes.
You know, when will they step up and say, we're just not going to take this thing about school shootings. We're not going to take this stuff. We're going to really do something about it. And what we're going to do is not what they did in the 60s, which is vote and demonstrate and sit in. We did that. That was great for the 60s. What can you do now that you are a person and a generation that's super empowered by technology? We could create a worldwide strike if we wanted of students.
Yes,
that wouldn't be impossible. When we go to do an interview, you know, kids were always in the past, they could interview their class, right, do a poll. Now with SurveyMonkey, you can do a poll of 1 million people. It's not that hard if you think about it. If you think about, these are the tools in my pocket, how do I use them powerfully to achieve goals that I think are important?
So given that the fact that we live in exponential times, how can we prepare students for the future?
What exponential times means is that the changes are coming incredibly more rapidly than they ever have. So you've got, you know, the kids who had a cell phone at one age and the kids who have a cell phone 10 years later have millions and billions more power in their hands. And we have to start thinking forward. We have to start saying, what's going to happen? Maybe we can't do this today, but what are we going to be able to be in 10 years and 20 years? Because that's when we're living. If we're a student, we're going to be living 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, and the differences in the world are going to be so immense that it's really time to start considering what they might be now.
I feel that this also extends to teachers and their employment of technology in their teaching and the students' learning. What are some of the problems that educators are facing, do you think?
Well, it's a tough situation, because here's a situation, academic education, history, you know, the math, science. We've learned how to do that. We know how to teach that to people. And suddenly we show up with these devices and say, well, you got to use those to do it. And it actually doesn't help them very much. But what we're not doing is saying, well, what else could we do that we could never do before? What could we do with a tool like Mathematica, which will probably take the whole PISA test for you and give you 100? You know, what can we do with the idea of supercomputers? What can we do with the idea of world networking? And that's the things that we really should be focused on. It's not teaching math and science and using a little technology. And it bothers me that we have such a narrow view of what technology is and how it enhances what our kids are capable of doing.
And what of the teachers who are so afraid of technology that they think one day an AI will take their place?
For certain things it will. For certain things it already has. So for content, the place to get content is YouTube. It's very simple. That's what my kid does when he wants to fly, when he wants to do this. All the content is on YouTube, and it's got the best teachers, and they're all there. If it's about content, the AI and the technology has already done the job. It's just that we prevent the kids from using it. But for other things, the kinds of things that computers don't yet do are dreams and passions and strengths in the broad human sense, and compassion and warmth. Those are the things that we need from teachers.
And so teachers, don't worry, you will have a job in the school of the future. So what would the school of the future look like, Ken?
Well, it's a different, first of all, a school. Why do we have something called a school? We have something called a school because it's very effective, cost effective, to bring kids into a building and keep them safe while their parents work and do all this kind of stuff. Very soon we're going to figure out other ways to do that. You can wear a bracelet, you can do whatever, I don't know what it's going to be, but we won't have to. So we'll only have to bring kids together when they need to be together or want to be together. And kids do like to be. That's their favorite thing in school, is to be with their friends. So what we're going to find out is that the goal that we have, which is making the world a better place, that is going to determine where we do it and how we do it. And the future is going to be teams of these symbiotic, hybrid, unique, they have to be unique because otherwise they'll just be automated, people in whatever locations. And this should be around the world. There's no reason why a team has to be completely local. It can be global. And we're just at the tiniest beginnings of figuring that stuff out. And that's what I'm talking about, where we should be expanding our thinking much more to saying, what is an education mean? And I see education not as the system, I see education as the process from becoming uneducated to being uneducated, from going what you can do at one age to what you can do at another age. And how we do that process is fundamentally, I think, going to be in flux.
And within this flux, what about the governments and policymakers? Well, what do they need to do in order to keep up with all these advancements in technology?
Well, it's again, it's tough because their view of education is what they had. So this is one of the greatest barriers to educating in the future, is that everybody was educated in the past.
Yes.
And it's a real irony. But there are the opportunity that I think that the politicians really have now is to say, let's not put all this effort and money and everything into changing this huge system boat that's worldwide that we have, but really saying, okay, let's experiment, let's try something different, let's see if that works, because there's lots of evidence that it does, and then let's decide how we compare and proportion and make things go differently. And I think we're going to start seeing some places doing that.
I usually like to end with the question, what are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about kids. I love kids. Every kid that I see has dreams, wants to do things, thinks about the future. My kid wants to go to space. He wants to, fly planes. I said, should I send you to space camp? He said, no, I'm not quite ready, but I'll, give me a couple of years. They know, not because they have a cell phone, but because they have television, because they're connected to the world, that the world is going forward very quickly. And I think most kids want to be a positive part of that. So I'm very optimistic about kids, all kids, everywhere. And I know that they're going to invent their future because they have to.
Yes.
In 30 years or 40 years, we'll all be dead. They will be still here.
Yes.
So they have to do that. And the more we can encourage them to think about it positively and not be scared of the future. I've gone into classrooms and said, how many kids are scared of the future? And hands go up. And I think, oh my goodness, why would you be scared of the future when this is the best time you could possibly be alive? So much is happening. And it can happen to all of us if we all work together to make it happen.
So before we leave, actually, what about awe and wonder?
They're very important, and I think everybody has them. And if we take them away, we're doing a disservice to everybody. So just look at the universe. It's bigger than anything that we could possibly imagine. It's more complex by way orders of magnitude than even humans are. We know nothing about it. It's awesome.
Marc, you're awesome. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing from everybody.